Oftentimes, political debates are emotionally fraught, and that takes us further away from the truth. But some issues, like the issues of race and inequity and discrimination, they're even more emotionally fraught, and the people who tend to push those issues the hardest in society tend to have the worst arguments for their positions. So today we're going to be looking at an interaction between Bakari Sellers, a political commentator, and Ben Shapiro and Bill Maher, who debated Sellers on Real Time with Bill Maher about his position on systemic racism. We use these things on this channel as teaching lessons, not to bash someone, but to increase our understanding of what's being said and hopefully forge ahead a pathway towards the truth. So we'll be doing a philosophical analysis of a little bit of this conversation. Before we get into that, my friends, hello, I am your host, Christian Watson. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, even if you disagree with me. Disagreement is how we forge ahead and we get towards a place where even if we continue to disagree, we understand each other better and we're closer to truth. And so please like that, click that like button, subscribe, do whatever you can, and now let's get on to the video. So, Sellers, Shapiro, and Maher, this interaction is actually quite interesting for a few reasons that I'm going to get into. But I actually want to play a little bit of the interaction, do kind of like a play-by-play, to show you different points where I thought certain things that were said shouldn't have been said or were incorrect. So, let's play this. Let's go here on the first segment, where Sellers is talking about how, in response to Ben Shapiro's argument, that he believes that it is just as bad today to be a black person in America as it was during Jim Crow Go.
I'm talking about systemic racism, and most times
has it gotten worse since 1960?
Yes, actually.
Systemic racism has gotten worse since Jim Crow.
Yes. So you want me to give you a stat? Black home ownership today is less than it was pre-Fair Housing Act of 1968. But let me also talk about the fact that
being the welfare state.
Let me also tell you this. A lot of times when we talk about racism, we only talk about the fact when somebody calls you nigger. But very rarely do we talk about the systems of injustice and oppression we have in this country. Where I'm from, Denmark, South Carolina, you don't have clean water, right? I live in a food desert, or grew up in a food desert, where you can't go a mile or two and have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. The schools are falling apart. The infrastructure is eroding.
Bakari, is your life as a black man better or worse than it would have been if you had been born in 1920 in the United States?
Well, all you have to do is ask my father, who literally was shot in the Orangeburg Massacre, right? Who helped found SNCC, who marched with Marion Barry and Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King, and the list goes on and on and on. And he will tell you today that he feels like this country's at 1954.
Okay. Now, this is a rather odd claim to make, as Shapiro points out. It's actually a very interesting claim to make as well, because evidently, if you just look at it empirically, this does not seem to be the case. But the folly of Shapiro's point here is not that he's incorrect, because he is correct. It is obviously not as bad in 2024 to be a black person than it was during Jim Crow, obviously. The folly is he didn't go deep enough in his dissection of what Sellers is actually saying here. Because if you actually look at the clip, Sellers justifies this position, not on the basis of data, not on the basis of a sound reasoning, not on the basis of sound logic. He justifies it in lived experience. In fact, you will find, and this is my first point that I want to make here, throughout this entire exchange, Sellers' argument is entirely based in lived experience. Now, using lived experience as an argument suffers from many problems. The chief among them being the conflation with human value, with human knowledge. What do I mean? So, Sellers says, my father was alive during this horrific period, and in his opinion, in his experience, he believes that horrific period is not as bad as what is happening right now. And then Sellers goes on to say, when Maher says, no, that makes no sense, he goes on to say, you're erasing my father's experience. When someone has something that is close to them in experience, that becomes quite personal to them. So that when you object to a claim made on the basis of experience, you are therefore, according to this logic, objecting to the value of that person. So what lived experience does is it conflates the value of the human being with the knowledge someone else has. Because whereas experience gives us a value, or at least it adds to our value in some way as a human being, what we know about the objective world, which is outside of our experience, That is far more fundamental, and that is far more important when it goes to dealing with issues that are beyond just our own life. The person who objects to this argument, we call them solipsists. A solipsist is someone that believes they can reduce the entire world to their own experience, the entire world and all knowledge to what they know. Not only is this person hubristic, this is someone who, just quite frankly, doesn't understand the limitations of their own humanity, and therefore is woefully uninformed on who they are. And in order to know something about the world, you must first know something about who you are at the very basic level, or else you are living in an illusion. So unfortunately, Sellers is using a very, very destructive argument here that justifies one living in an illusion and trusting their own wisdom, even if the reality around them does not conform to their presuppositions. There's another idea in philosophy called the direction of fit. Basically, and this is an idea in epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. Direction of fit says that there are two ways that people interpret events or things. There's one way where people will allow new knowledge, new information to mold how they think currently. This is what the intellectual does. This is what the thinking person does. They let the facts mold their knowledge. There's another part of this direction of fit, however, that says that people will try to fit the world to their own perceptions, which therefore means they are not subject to belief revision, which then means they're not as subject to changing their mind. They are a closed-minded person, putting it quite simply. And being closed-minded in this particular sense is dangerous because it prevents you from being able to progress intellectually. You know, progress in our society today is held as this indispensable good that if you don't have it, you are somehow living in a period of squalor and destitution. And progress itself, I don't think, is a value. Progress itself is a neutral phenomenon that can be good or can be bad. But intellectual progress is a necessity of living a fulfilled and enriched life because intellectual progress is exercise for the brain, and if you keep exercising the brain like a muscle, it'll go stronger, your neural pathways will open up, and your understanding, if it doesn't increase, it will at least be fed. But the argument Sellers makes here entraps someone into a pit of their own ignorance. So, there are just several problems with that I think we really need to understand. Another problem with lived experience, before we move on, is this issue of standpoint thinking. Now, in philosophy, there is a term called standpoint epistemology. What I want you to understand about this is just, it says that certain people of certain identities have certain perceptions of the world, and only they can access that perception. So, for example, this argument would say, if you're a man like me, you cannot object to a woman having an abortion. Well, if you believe in standpoint epistemology, and the experience of having an abortion is tied to being a woman, which it is, therefore, the only person that has access to that is a woman, therefore, the only person that can really comment about that. But the problem with this is that abortion is not solely about one party involved. Abortion is not solely about one aspect. Every situation has multiple aspects. Abortion is fundamentally about the subject of life, which is universal across our planet in both the animal kingdom and amongst humans in advanced civilization. And the subject of life being universal, no matter how it manifests in particular instances, is still subject to our consideration. Therefore, if abortion is a category of life, or a category that has to do with life, which it does, then therefore, anyone who is using his reason can discuss it. But this mentality that Sellers comes from would reject that and reduce everything to personal subjective truth, which just is not a feasible way to understand the world. Anyway, moving on. Let's keep going on and let's look at what Sellers tries to say just to justify the idea that racism is rampant. Go.
I think the ridiculous notion is for either one of you all to have the audacity to believe that you understand what the experience is to be. So, for example, one of my major political issues is African-American female mortality, right? If you want to talk about structural racism. Did you know, I'm sure you do, but black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women.
That's also true in Europe, by the way.
But we're talking about the United States of America.
I know, but the problem is you have to have a control.
But we do have a control.
Well, no,
and
your
we're
statistical control.
And so tell me why that is.
Okay, the answer is because black people in the United States have a lower household income, median household income, which means they typically go to hospitals.
I would call bullshit because it actually crosses across socioeconomic lines. So you can be my wife who almost died during childbirth. You can be Serena Williams who almost died during childbirth.
So what's your answer?
Because actually...
White doctors are racist?
No, but there actually is implicit bias in our healthcare delivery system.
Okay, so Sellers here is saying that there is a food desert, there is pregnancy and childbirth, death rates, so on and so forth. And Shapiro is trying to say, well, there are other variables. And this is one thing that's very important. Whenever you see an issue, you have to ensure that you're incorporating the other variables. If you don't do it, you embrace a fallacy called the multivariate fallacy, where you assume a single variable is the explainer for everything, when in our reality, you're missing things. Therefore, you're assigning a false origin to those things. But the more important point here is that Sellers has an institutional view of man. Sellers believes, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed, that the society that a man lives in, or the society in this case that black people live in, are feeding them things that are fundamentally negative on an institutional level, which he would say leads to disparities, which then therefore are, in this New Age definition, racism. So if you believe that people are defined within the context of social institutions, and if you believe someone's livelihood is defined in that context as well, solely or primarily, then you can easily say under that definition, there's a lot of racism. But you could say that about any group that has some kind of disparity or some kind of deficit in terms of resources, whether it be housing, whether it be life expectancy, whether it be rates of medical disease. If you reduce things to the level of institutions, you can say that about almost anyone at any period of time. Therefore, this breaks down. Under the institutional view of humanity, society, the idea that you can objectively analyze things breaks down, and it allows you to assume things that are fundamentally false. If you look at disparities as a way of trying to detect racism, you will always detect racism. You may even detect it in some greater portions in some other areas, because your standard is a naturally occurring standard. There will always be disparities. There will always be deficiencies. And if you analyze it on group level, there will always be something that you can point at that says there is an injustice here. But just because things look different does not mean they are evil. The left conflates difference with evil. This is one of the reasons why the idea of equality needs to be talked about more forcefully. Because equality, in its proper sense, does not mean we get the same thing. Equality, in its proper sense, fundamentally means that we all have the same value as human beings. That was the conception our founders had. But the left kind of twisted this, and they say, no. Equality is not a matter of human value. It's a matter of the distribution of resources. Therefore, you get welfareism, you get all kind of things. You get social justice, you get equity, you get all kind of things that are a rotted out corpse of what equality actually should be. All right, last point. I think one of the things you have to understand here is that Sellers is using this idea called issue linkage, which is basically a method of analysis that groups in a bunch of things that may seem similarly related into one umbrella, regardless of if they are actually related, and attempts to sell them as one holistic issue. This denies the nuances that exist between certain ideas. So obviously, living in a food desert, not having access to nutrition, is a different issue than a certain subset of women dying in childbirth compared to the population. But under the idea of issue linkage, you can tie these things together and then present them as all one holistic argument to make your point, even at the risk of actually understanding these ideas. And so when Shapiro said at the very end that you have to account for other confounds, Sellers is like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about. Because Sellers is used to treating this particular issue as one single issue. And that's wrong. Issue linkage is bad because, number one, it does not allow you to take an intellectually serious approach to certain issues. Number two, it enables you to think about issues that are different in one single way rather than embracing their internal complexity. And number three, it just disables you from being able to critically examine your own ideas. And if you cannot critically examine your own ideas, then my friend, I must submit to you that you cannot actually understand your own ideas. So, all in all, I think Shapiro and Maher did an okay job pointing out where Sellers was wrong on certain points. But pundits oftentimes point out where their opponents are wrong, but they do not address the phenomena that underlie the fallacies their opponents make. And that is why, my friends, you will continue to get these old dead arguments that were defeated in the 80s and 70s by people like Walter William and Thomas Sowell. They will still exist in 2024 because pundits, the secondhand dealers, the public faces of their respective ideologies, will not actually address the underlying philosophical issues that bring rise to these ideas. They will simply address the points that they can debunk to get numbers on social media. We need to change that. We need a revolution of the mind in this country. One that emphasizes intellectualism, that emphasizes reason, and emphasizes engaging with the underlying foundations of an idea, not just the outer surface of an idea. That is my message, my friends. My guys, thank you so much for being here and supporting me. Study history, study philosophy. Please be sure to donate to me if you want to. Be sure to comment on this video, subscribe, share, do whatever you can. And most importantly, my friends, please stay pensive. Bye, guys.